Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I am with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 5, 6, and 7 of A to Z Mysteries, The Talking T-Rex. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 5. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose watched the men follow Officer Fallon toward the police station. Above their heads, Tyrone's big plastic eyes stared. "This is great," Dean grumbled. "Judd comes to see us and his money gets stolen." "I just don't see how anyone did it," Ruth Rose said. "We were all here yesterday afternoon, and Dean guarded Tyrone last night. Plus, he was locked inside Tyrone during the show." "So maybe Dean is the thief," Josh said. "He could have taken the money last night, or even during the show. No one saw what he did after that door closed." "But we know what he did," Dink said. "He was working on the computer. Otherwise, Tyrone wouldn't have moved or talked." "That's just it," Josh said. "Tyrone didn't move for the first few minutes, remember? Maybe that's when Dean was snitching the duffel bag." Dink shook his head. "I don't believe Dean would steal from his best friend," he said. Just then, Officer Keene pulled up in his cruiser. He climbed out with a roll of yellow tape and several wooden stakes in his arms. "Hi, kids," he said. "Little excitement, huh?" He set the tape and stakes on the ground and walked over to Tyrone. The wedge was still in place, letting him open the door wider. He glanced inside. "Whew, you could bake a pie in there," he said. Officer Keene began shoving stakes into the ground around Tyrone. Then he strung the crime scene tape around the stakes, forming a big circle around the dinosaur. "Can we go to Ellie's?" Josh said. "My brain needs a drink." The kids started walking across Center Park. "Do you really think Dean is the robber?" Ruth Rose asked Josh. "Yes," he said. "He has a key and he knew where the money was hidden." "What about Scoop?" Ruth Rose asked. "Could he have borrowed a key from Dean or Judd?" "If he had, they would have mentioned it to Officer Fallon," Josh responded. "Maybe the thief was someone else," Dink said. "Some stranger who knew how to pick locks." "But Dean was sleeping outside the dinosaur," Ruth Rose said. "How would a thief get past him?" "That's why I think it's Dean," Josh said as he pulled open the door to Ellie's diner. The kids slid into a booth near the windows. One of the Tyrone flyers was taped to the glass. Ellie waved, then came over. "Hi, kids. Why aren't you at the dinosaur show?" she asked. "It's over," Josh said. "But someone stole their money." Ellie slid in next to Josh. "Who stole whose money?" she asked with wide eyes. Ruth Rose explained about the money that was kept inside Tyrone's belly. "Those poor guys," Ellie said, standing up. "They were so excited when they came in for breakfast this morning." "Officer Fallon is on the case," Ruth Rose said. "Good," Ellie said. "Josh, your tongue is almost hanging out. How about some fresh lemonade?" she asked. The kids agreed, and Ellie brought 3 tall glasses. Josh took a big slurp through his straw. "So you guys agree that Dean is the robber?" Dink stirred his lemonade. "I don't. Dean wouldn't be dumb enough to steal the money while he was guarding it last night," he said. "That would point the finger right at him." Josh shook his head. "He could have taken the duffel bag during the show," he said. "How?" Ruth Rose asked. "Easy," Josh said. "He locks himself inside Tyrone, he moves the table and rug, grabs the duffel bag, then puts the rug and table back. It only takes him a minute." "Then what?" Dink asked. "Where'd he put the duffel bag?" He and Ruth Rose stared at Josh, waiting for his answer. Josh blinked at them. He took a sip of his lemonade. "Okay, here's what happened," he said. "Dean told us he built that little compartment inside Tyrone, right? So what if he built a second one that only he knew about, and that's where he hid the money?" Dink looked at Josh over his glass. "You think the money is still inside Tyrone?" "Why not?" Josh asked. "It's perfect. No one would think to look for it there." Ruth Rose squinted her eyes at Josh. "Except someone with a sneaky mind like yours." "I say we go search old Tyrone the T-Rex," Josh said, finishing his lemonade. "If I'm right, Dean is planning to come and get the duffel bag as soon as he gets a chance." "I hate to admit it, but Josh is making sense," Ruth Rose said. It won't hurt to look inside Tyrone." The kids left their money on the table, waved at Ellie, and headed back toward the high school. A few minutes later, the kids stood looking at Tyrone, surrounded by yellow crime scene tape. Officer Keene was gone. "No one's supposed to go past the tape," Dink said. "We could say we didn't see it," Josh suggested. "Right," Dink said. "It's broad daylight and we can't see bright yellow tape." "But what if it was dark?" Ruth Rose said, looking at Dink. "We could come back tonight." Dink shook his head. "Forget it, guys. We'll be at the fireworks with our parents tonight." Josh draped an arm around Dink's shoulder. "Perfect," he said. "While they're looking up at the sky, we can sneak away." Dink finally agreed. "But I'm only doing this for Judd," he said. The kids heard a bark and saw Mr. Pocket and Randolph inspecting the rose bush in the park. They walked over to say hi. "Did you hear about the robbery?" Ruth Rose asked. "Yes, and I feel bad for those young men," Mr. Pocket said. "Any news?" Dink shook his head. "But something might break tonight," Josh said, giving Dink a little nudge. "Our bush looks fine," Mr. Pocket said, "but I have to get rid of this dead one. Dink, do you want to get the wheelbarrow for me?" Dink ran to the shed. The wheelbarrow was where he had left it, leaning on the burlap bags. As Dink was leaving, he noticed muddy footprints on the bricks. He brought the wheelbarrow to Mr. Pocket. "Thanks," Mr. Pocket said as he loaded the dead rosebush onto the wheelbarrow. "I'll toss it into this school dumpster." He walked away with Randolph galloping along beside the wheelbarrow. "Look, there's Judd and Scoop," Josh said, pointing toward the dinosaur. The two men were standing outside the crime scene tape. Judd was talking and pointing a finger at the door in Tyrone's side. Scoop answered him, shaking his head. The kids were too far away to hear their words. After a moment, the two men climbed into Scoop's car and drove away. Dean wasn't with them. "Officer Fallon must be holding Dean as a suspect," Dink said. The sweet lemonade in his stomach suddenly felt sour. Chapter 6. As they walked home, the kids talked about the theft. Josh stopped walking. A sly look shone from his green eyes. "I figured it out," he whispered. "I know who stole the money." "Who?" Dink said. "It was Tyrone," Josh said. "While everyone was asleep, he walked to the bank and made a dino deposit." Dink shoved Josh, and Ruth Rose rolled her eyes. Before splitting up, they agreed to meet and walk to the fireworks together. "Drop off your sleeping bags at my house," Dink said. "My folks said we could sleep outside after the fireworks." "And wear dark clothes," Josh said. At 8:30, Josh, Ruth Rose, and their families met at Dink's house. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose piled their sleeping bags on the picnic table. The adults carried blankets, bags of popcorn, and bug spray. Nate, Brian, and Bradley each had brought their favorite stuffed animals. The three families walked to Main Street and turned left. They took another left at Holly's gas station. From there, it was only a short walk down East Green Street to the swimming pool where the fireworks were set up. "Why are you three dressed in black?" Ruth Rose's dad asked. "You look like ninjas." "We're hoping the mosquitoes won't see us in the dark," Ruth Rose said, glancing at Dink. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose walked ahead, leaving the others behind. "Good thinking," Josh said when he was sure he couldn't be overheard. A few minutes later, they all arrived at the town pool. Hundreds of people were already there. Blankets and chairs covered the lawns near the pool, tennis courts, and baseball field. The fire truck was parked nearby in case it was needed. "I see Judd, Scoop, and Dean," Josh said. The three men sat leaning against the fence that surrounded the baseball field. "Let's go sit with them." "We can't," Ruth Rose said. "If we do, they'll see us sneak away later." "Well, at least go over and say hi," Dink said. "Yeah, and we can see if Dean looks guilty," Josh commented. The kids wove their way through the blankets and chairs. Judd noticed them first and stood up. "Howdy," he said, waving. "You guys want to sit with us?" Scoop and Dean said hi too, but didn't stand up. "Can't," Josh said. "We have to stay near our parents." "Officer Fallon is a nice guy," Judd said. "I sure hope he can find our money. We're taking Tyrone down tomorrow and leaving." "Where are you guys going?" Ruth Rose asked. "New Haven first, then a bunch of other towns," Scoop said. "We have a lot more money to earn." Dean didn't join the conversation. His dark eyes stared straight ahead. "Good evening," a voice said. It was Mr. Linkletter, the Shangri-La Hotel's manager. He was sitting on a lawn chair a few feet away. Everyone said hi. I hope your room is comfortable, Mr. Linkletter said to Judd and Scoop. It's great, Judd answered. Just then a circle of blue light lit the sky over their heads. Ooh, cried hundreds of people. They're starting, Ruth Rose said. We better go find our parents. How about breakfast at Ellie's tomorrow? Judd asked. I don't want to leave without saying goodbye. Sure, Dink said. What time? We're getting up real early to load Tyrone onto the truck, he said. So how about 9 o'clock? We'll be there, said Dink. The kids walked away toward their families. They picked a spot near the tennis courts where they could still keep an eye on the 3 men by the fence. Guys, did you hear what Judd said? Ruth Rose asked. They're taking Tyrone apart tomorrow. So if that's where Dean hid the money, he needs to get it before then, Josh said. Or whoever, Dink added. Trust me, it's Dean, Josh went on. Did you guys notice how he just sat and didn't say a word to anyone? In my book, that spells Guilty. Volunteer firefighters have built a low barricade around the fireworks. The police have placed detour signs on River Road to keep cars away. Firefighters in white t-shirts went through the crowd handing out tiny American flags. For a few minutes, the kids watched fireworks bursting over their heads. The sky went from black to red, white, and blue. The crowd clapped and whistled and yelled. When the next really big one goes off, let's boogie, Josh whispered. A second later, the sky blossomed into a giant yellow flower. While every eye was looking up, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose slipped away in the dark. They darted across East Green Street and raced to the high school lawns. A nearly full moon cast the dinosaur's shadow halfway across the playing field. Behind the kids, the sky was still lit with fireworks. A breeze swept across the field, making the yellow tape rattle against the stakes. Now what? Dink asked. I really don't like being here, guys. I don't either, Ruth Rose said. But if the duffel bag is still inside Tyrone, we have to find it tonight. Chapter 7. Let's just do it, Josh said. It'll take us 5 minutes. If we don't find the money, we go back to watch the fireworks. The kids crept under the yellow tape. They were concealed in Tyrone's dark shadow. The rubber wedge was holding the door open an inch. Josh removed it and swung the door open. I can't see anything, Dink said. How can we search in the dark? Wait, Ruth Rose said. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket. She flipped it on and aimed the beam past the folded steps into Tyrone's belly. The table and rug were still off to one side. The compartment lid was up and the space was still empty. Then Ruth Rose shut off the light. Dink pulled down the steps and they scrambled up into Tyrone's belly. Dink folded the steps back while Josh eased the door shut. They were in a dark, stuffy cave. It's roasting in here, Josh's voice complained from the darkness. Dink was on his knees. One arm rested against the small table. The compartment that once held the duffel bag was in front of him. But he couldn't see it. Let's get this over with, Dink said. I'd like to get back to the fireworks before my folks know we're gone. Ruth Rose flipped on her flashlight and shone it around the small space. Okay, Josh, show us this secret hiding place, she said. It wouldn't be right out in plain sight, Josh said. Look for someplace no one would think of. On his knees, Josh shuffled around to face the rear legs. They were attached to the rest of the body with large bolts. I'll bet these legs are hollow, he said. Josh felt around and, sure enough, was able to stick his arm down inside one leg. Nothing down there, he said. Dink examined the other leg, but there was nothing hidden inside that one either. What about up inside his head? Ruth Rose asked. Her light followed the cables up Tyrone's chest and neck. At the top, only a dark hole showed where the head was. Let's find out, Dink said. He stood up and tried to reach his hand up Tyrone's head cavity. I'm not tall enough. Wait a sec, Josh said. He lifted the laptop computer off the table and sat it on the floor. Then he slid the table over to Dink. Dink climbed on the table and reached again. This time his arm was inside Tyrone's head. He moved his hand around in the space. All I feel are the wires that come from the computer, he said. But my arm isn't long enough to reach all the way. Could I fit in there? Ruth Rose asked. Probably, Dink said. The head is hollow. Josh giggled. Like yours, he said. Let me go up, Ruth Rose said. I'll stand on the table, then you guys boost me. Ruth Rose and Dink traded places. Josh held the flashlight in his mouth as he and Dink lifted Ruth Rose up Tyrone's throat. She disappeared into the head with only her feet sticking out. Then her feet vanished and they saw her face peering down at them. "There's nothing up here but a little speaker attached to those wires," she said. "And a bunch of teeth." Josh flashed the light around the walls. "I don't see any place else you could hide a pile of money," he said. "So what do we do?" Dink asked. "First, get some air in here," Josh said. He handed Dink the flashlight and reached for the door. Dink shut off the flashlight. "Don't open it too wide," he said. "I don't feel like getting arrested for breaking and entering a dinosaur." Josh shoved the door. It didn't move. "Help me, Dinkus. It's stuck." Both boys leaned their shoulders against the door and pushed. "The door must have locked when we closed it," Josh said. "We forgot to wedge it open with that rubber thing." Dink flipped on the flashlight and aimed the beam up at Ruth Rose. "If I hand this to you, can you shine it out through the mouth?" he asked. "If you yell, someone might hear you." She shook her head. "The mouth is closed." "We have to try something," Dink said, waving the flashlight around. "I'm not staying in here all night." "Got it," Josh said. "I think I know how to boot up Dean's computer. If I can make Tyrone's mouth open, we can yell for help through the microphone and speaker." "No one would hear us over the fireworks noise," Ruth Rose said. "But you gave me another idea, Josh. If you can open Tyrone's mouth, maybe I can climb out that way." "Ruth Rose, Tyrone's head is too high off the ground," Dink said. He looked at Josh. "Is there anything we can make a ladder out of?" Suddenly Josh grabbed the flashlight from Dink's hand. He shone it around the walls until the beam fell on a row of hooks. "I thought so," Josh said. "What?" Dink said. Josh reached out and grabbed a coil of rope. "This," he said. "We can use it to lower Ruth Rose out of Tyrone's mouth to the ground." Dink looked up at Ruth Rose. "Do you think you could?" he asked. Ruth Rose nodded. "Tyrone's mouth is pretty big," she said. "Like Josh's," Dink said, grinning at his friend. "Very amusing," Josh said. He passed the flashlight to Dink, then sat in front of the laptop. He turned it on, then tapped a few keys. Several icons appeared on the screen. One of them was labeled Tyrone. Josh clicked it, and a window appeared showing a list of choices. One of the words was mouth. "Bingo," Josh said. "Get ready, Ruth Rose." Josh clicked on mouth. A second later, Dink heard a grinding sound. "It worked!" Ruth Rose yelled. "Tyrone's mouth is opening." Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 8, 9, and 10. Goodbye.